Margaret Thatcher, the UK's greatest Prime Minister, or the worst thing that ever happened in Britain? That's the question I've been asking you all afternoon. Now let's get discussing it. If you're watching on Catch Up, you can still put your comments in Twitter, Facebook, and on YouTube here, or indeed send me an email, john@johngaunt.com. Dead simple. Right, let's get talking. Margaret Thatcher, 1979 was the year. She defeated, of course, the so-called winter of discontent. Whether you like Thatcher or not, you've got to accept she changed Britain for good. Now, I've got mixed emotions on her. I stood on a picket line with the miners at Kersley on the outskirts of Coventry. I thought what happened with the pits was dreadful, but it wasn't all her fault. I'll talk more about that later. I also marched around Coventry city centre carrying a coffin when CND were demonstrating over Greenham Common. I wasn't a Greenham Common woman, by the way, but when the missiles came to Britain, I thought it was the end of the world. It's the end of the world as we know it, when actually it was quite the opposite. Her and Ronnie Reagan and their tough approach meant the world stayed safe. Well, have I got that wrong? Unilateral disarmament, what a load of cobblers. But I believed in it at the time. And that's what I'm trying to say to you. I think Thatcher does that to you. Some people say she's Marmite. I don't think she is Marmite, because I think with Marmite, like me, I hate it. My kids and my wife adore it. Lisa loves it. But I can't stand the stuff. So when they say things are Marmite, Marmite means you can't stand anything. Right? It doesn't mean sometimes you like it, sometimes you don't, if you follow what I mean. She's not a Marmite figure to me. At one point, I despised Margaret Thatcher. As I got older and as I saw the way the world's gone, and look at our lousy Labour government now, gosh, do I wish we had Maggie back. She would not be taking any nonsense. That said, I'm a hypocrite. I remember when Stand Down Margaret came out by The Beat. I bought it and I loved it. I thought she was a racist at that time. I didn't think she was good for the country. I went on parts of the People's March for Jobs. And the truth is, Maggie Thatcher never got unemployment down. And the other truth is, which again we'll talk about as we progress, but feel free to join in if you want, she would not have survived. A bit like Alex Ferguson. He was one game away from getting the sack. Maggie Thatcher was on the way out because she hadn't solved the winter of discontent and the unemployment. We were still in a recession. Then suddenly the Falklands happened. And whether you like her or not, she was a brilliant war leader. Absolutely brilliant. And you can see why those boys, when they sailed away, I can still see it now. I was at university. We watched it on the telly as they sailed out of Southampton on the QE2 and the rest of it, how proud they were and we were of them. I know, as it turns out, they went to fight basically an army of conscripts, and it was a totally unfair fight, but it was our territory. It's still our territory. And long may it remain that way. You wouldn't have found Maggie Thatcher giving away our sovereign territory, not like Starmer, who looks like he's been doing it behind our backs with the Chagos Isles. Are you with me or against me? I think in the balance of all things, she was a great Prime Minister. She was a fantastic woman, the first woman to ever get that job, and she held the job for longer than anyone else. I mean, I know it feels like Keir Starmer's been there for centuries at the moment, but he's only been there 7 months, only 7 months to cock up the country. She was in charge for the best part of 15 years. And again, I'm sure you're like me. You can't forget when she left, when she's looking out the window and then she comes downstairs and she's crying and she gets in the, I think it was Jaguar, and drives away from the Downing Street. It was the end of an era. And of course, a lot of what she did, basically Blair capitalized on. And he was a charismatic leader, but she had real charisma, especially when you think she was following on from people like Callaghan and Ted Heath. And I found out something today, which I didn't know. She only got the gig as leader of the Conservatives because Airy Neve, who later on got blown up in the car park in Westminster by the IRA, he told everyone to vote for her because don't worry, she won't win. Nobody's really voting for her. And she goes and bloody wins the leadership. And she did rule that party and the country with an iron fist. That's why the Russians called her the Iron Lady. So I'm taking your views on Maggie Thatcher. But look, I'm 63. I was at university, just going to university, 79, when she was really at the beginning of the top of her game. We were the sick man of Europe. Factories closing down left, right, and centre. And I believe in trade unions. I actually do believe in the right for everybody to withdraw their labour. But it was getting beyond a joke, wasn't it, with people like Red Robbo? He was constantly pulling them out on strike, and it was all done on a show of hands. That was wrong. What she brought in, some of those trade union rules were correct. Some weren't. We shall talk about it as the show progresses. Let's start. We had some early birds today. Malta says by 1979, this country was in crisis and on its knees due to socialism and anarchy, unions causing mayhem. She was magnificent, a political giant, transformed our nation for the better. Well, I partly agree with you, but not totally. What do you think? The Barren flights. Maggie only did two things wrong. The poll tax, she spelt that wrong. It's double L, not L-E. That's something completely different. That. Imagine Maggie doing pole dancing. Anyway, the poll tax and care in the community. I agree. Care in the community. I'm not sure if that was totally her, whether that was John Major later. But the closing down of the big sanatoriums was a major mistake. Some people who are mentally ill need locking up out in the countryside for their own safety and the safety of the rest of us. And care in the community was just a cheap version of doing it. And it was playing, and it is playing, as with Axel in Southport, or Russian roulette with our safety. I disagree with it. Where are we next? Andy, she made more damage to this country than the Luftwaffe did with their bombs. Well, that's your view. I think a lot of people will disagree with you, Andy. If you've got a view, pick up the phone. That'll be in a few weeks. Just get tapping away on the typewriter. That shows how old I am. Stephen Freestone says, Thatcher was boom and bust. Selling off our utilities has meant we're now paying a fortune as they're all owned by European powerhouses where we subsidise the French in particular. You're half right, Stephen. It is true, but she didn't sell off gas and electricity to them. She had a proviso that some of it had to be still in our control. Do you remember the adverts for gas? Tell Sid. Do you remember that? But a lot of people began to own shares. And it's the same with the council houses. You see, when she sold off the council houses, I think it went up to 25% home ownership. I was in favour of that. What I wasn't in favour of, and I'm never sure whether it was her or the councils, they didn't use the profit they made to build more social housing. That's why we're in the mess we're in now. And it is true that successive governments, because of privatisation, particularly gas, electricity and water, we've got ourselves in a position where European countries, France and Germany, are subsidising their lecky and gas on the backs of us. And that's wrong. But then I'm a bit of a socialist when it comes to the main utilities. I don't think they should be in private hands. And I've always thought this. I've never really changed my mind. I believe they should be owned by all of us. Water, gas and electricity. Because as it happens, water is going to be owned by us again, isn't it? Because they've made such a cock-up of it. Got a view? Send me a message. So she came to power after the winter of discontent. Most of the things that she believed in and she introduced, I think I still believe in. What do you think? Small government, less interference. I mean, let's compare and contrast Maggie with the kind of country we're living in now, where you've almost got to get permission to break wind or burp, where we live in this woke culture, where the government want to regulate everything. They want to be in every part of your life. Meanwhile, they want to tax you to death. That's what Starmer's doing. Well, I would rather have the fat Thatcher way of life, small government, small taxes. That's where I am. What's your view on that? Come on, let's hear from you. And the privatization of some of the utilities needed to happen, didn't it? I mean, the railways, I know they've gone off track. Oh, pardon the pun. But I mean, it was dreadful. People go back to, oh, you know, it was much better when it was British Rail. Well, it was better when one company kind of owned the lot. I agree. However, let's not look back with rose-tinted spectacles. It was still rubbish then. Ever since Beeching closed down most of the tracks, our railway system has been atrocious. We're 20, 30 years too late with HS2, and they're still arguing about it. I still wouldn't be surprised if that got cancelled completely. That's what's wrong with politics. There's no long-term policy, is there? Rachel Reeves the other day saying we're going to have another runway at Heathrow. We were arguing about that when I was on BBC London decades ago. And it's not for another 20 years. She's like Stalin. I mean, instead of a 5-year plan, it's a 20-year plan. The sun will shine tomorrow. But you see, that's what Thatcher did. After the Falklands, she made us believe in ourselves. Did you see the poll out yesterday that many of so-called Generation Z, or whatever they're called, the bunch of youngsters, thickos, I'm surprised they answered the poll because they're too busy on their phones with their right hand. I'm not sure what they're doing with their left hand. But they don't want to fight for the country, and they think the country's racist. And quite a few people were getting up in arms about this. Then I saw some vox pops on the news channels, and when you look at the kids they're talking to, they haven't got a clue. They'll grow up when they get a house, and when they've got a dustbin of their own that they want emptying more than every 4 weeks, they'll change their attitude. So let's not get too worked up about that. But she made us believe in Britain, not in cool Britannia like Tony Blair, but she made us believe in our culture, our tradition, our history, and our future as a result of that. Because you can't know your future. You can't even understand your present if you don't understand your history. Are you with me or against me? And I think that's one thing that was positive about Thatcher. Very positive. And I suppose the Falklands, the fact we went there and we slapped their asses, just underlined it. I know it was an unfair war on one level because they were a dictatorship. Galtieri was just trying to boost his flagging popularity, and we were far superior because our troops were just so fit and so well trained, and we had the missiles. Although that didn't mean we didn't lose men, we did. And of course, you can never talk about the Falklands without talking about the Belgrano. But the Belgrano and the sinking of it, like it or not, ended the war, didn't it? That's the truth. Because that's what she was like. She was single-minded. Compare and contrast that, again, with our present government or the government we had before or any of those politicians. See those politicians who were writing in a WhatsApp group and they sacked them. And now they've replaced one of them, the one who was a minister, a junior minister, with some woman who says she identifies as a llama. She thinks it's okay for people to say, yeah, I'm a llama. Yeah, a llama. You heard me right. Not Alana. Not Alana out of the Thompson twins. There's one for you. A llama. A sheep on stilts. She said, yes, you can. You can identify like that. Oh, next time she's ill, I can't wait till they get her in the local vets or in the PDSA, and their suggestion will be injection in the head. That'd probably be the answer now for her. How can a woman who says that end up in government? That's who Starmer's just appointed. That would never have happened under Thatcher. I mean, I know we had certain instances. We had I always remember when I was on, I think it was on BBC CWR. Was it Stephen Mulligan, the Tory MP? It came up on the wires that a man had hung himself. And when you get these wire things, you rip them off when you're on the radio and you have to sort of say what's on it. But it said in big block capitals, don't mention the stockings and suspenders. He was some Home Office minister. It got me thinking, that did. And then we could name him. And then it said, don't mention the Satsuma. I sat there the whole of the breakfast show wondering what the Satsuma was, and more importantly, where did they find it? He'd done what Michael Hutchins did, hung himself off a door jamb. Autoerotic something it's called. I don't know. It's beyond me, that is. That's beyond me, let me tell you. I've only just found the G-spot, let alone it. But anyway, that's what he did. Don't mention the orange. Would Thatcher have given up the Chagos Islands? I don't think so, says David Danes on YouTube. Thank you for your comment, Dane. If you want to comment, if you're on Twitter, Facebook, or indeed on YouTube, feel free. Don't forget, this is also a podcast, and you can download that in all the normal places, Spotify, Apple, etc. So you can listen to it again when you're out walking the dog. And if you're listening to it as a podcast, try out the YouTube channel as well. Because even though I haven't got my flashy green screen up today, I'm in my daughter's kitchen. I'm still dog sitting. I keep moaning about it. I actually love it. Went for a nice little walk with him today because he's getting his strength back. But it's just great, isn't it? Man and his dog. I don't think you can beat it. Someone just contemplate. Just think about life. Anyway, let's get back to where I was. So the Falklands saved her. Her popularity went through the roof. And do you remember Brian Hannahan? I counted them out and I counted them in. What was he? Was he on the Ark Royal? He was on one of those big ships, wasn't he, where the jets were taken off. And, of course, I remember HMS Coventry getting hit. And, as I say, just a minute ago, the Belgrano as well. But it was the kind of first TV war. I mean, we used to all watch the war. What was it called? World War. Was it called World War something? It used to be on ITV before the football on a Sunday. World at War. But this was the first one we watched kind of live. It was incredible. And I remember sitting there with my flatmates, Nigel, Jed, and the rest of the guys watching in this squatted little flat as we went into Goose Green and places like that. I've spoken to a mate of mine, Dougie Brimston, who was in the RAF at the time. He was fueling the planes on Ascension Isle. And the pride that these boys have got for what they achieved, because it was a phenomenal achievement. And I think history has been unfair to the Falklands vets, because a lot of people think that war was not right. It wasn't just, and the sinking of the Belgrano. They forget the fact that this foul dictator tried to take that land away and tried to take away British people's right to live there. So I think there's been a lot of revisionism about it, and I don't like it. So anyway, I've got written here, I've got some notes on my phone. Do you remember the QE2 going and then coming back with the boys? Fantastic moments. All the ticker tape, the Union flags. We wrapped ourselves in the flag, didn't we? We were proud to be British, and we've lost that. Again, this survey of young kids, they're not proud to be British. Where's that come from? Well, it's got to have come from too many lessons saying basically our history is disgusting, like I just mentioned about the Falklands, or we were slave traders, we did this, we did that, not mentioning the fact about emancipation, that we were the first to free the slaves. I know our history isn't all glory. I know that. But there are certain people in the teaching professions, the common purpose, woke brigade, who want to make out our history as if it's something we should be ashamed of. Well, I don't think it is. I'd like to get your views. Interestingly as well, I've done a little poll both on Facebook and on Twitter, asking you what you think of Thatcher. Interestingly, on Facebook, it's 80% of people think she was the greatest prime minister, 20% don't. But on Twitter, it's more like 75-25. You can still vote if you want to. It's just a bit of fun. It's not scientific in any way, shape, or form. But that's interesting, isn't it? And some people have been saying in comments, and it's a fair point, no, Winston Churchill was the best prime minister. Well, I didn't include him because that was during the war. And it's fair to say after the war, he didn't get elected, did he? He got thrown out, basically. He was a wartime prime minister. Fantastic. Without him, we wouldn't have won. Of course, just take that as read. He was a great, great man. But what I'm trying to say is not quite the same as Thatcher, because Thatcher was doing it in peacetime. Yes, she had the Falklands, but she did it in peacetime, and she changed this country. She changed the whole industry. Some parts of that I hate. The heavy industry, a lot of that went. And let's talk about the miners in a moment. A lot of our heavy industry went, and she turned us more into a service economy. I don't like that. I still don't like it, if I'm honest with you. But that's what she did. And it didn't create the jobs that she hoped for. She never solved the job problem. So let's not paint her as if everything she touched was fantastic. Maya Kinsley, YouTube, says, it feels like we're stuck with a foul dictator in Starmer, and I'd choose Maggie all day, every day. I'm with you on that. There's absolutely no question about it, is there? If you could have Maggie or Starmer, it'd be a landslide. If we got Maggie back today, it'd be a landslide. Even the socialists would be voting for her. I don't think they voted for Starmer, did they? Anyway, let's talk about that as well. So then in 1982, after the Falklands, she won again. And then, of course, there was the Brighton bombing. I stayed in that hotel. When I was working for The Sun, we did a party conference down there, and I actually stayed. That's how well off The Sun were. We had the same hotel, the Grand Hotel it's called, as the Tories and the major political parties used to stay in. And it's got these magnificent staircases. And it made me think about Norman Tebbit and his poor wife. They fell down about, 4 floors, didn't they, when the bomb went off? Do you remember that day? An horrendous time. Horrendous time. Because whether you agree with them politically or not, no one deserves to be blown up. And that woman was disabled then for the rest of her life. Nobody deserves that. Nobody. So it was the Brighton bombing. And then there was the miners' strike. And that's one of the things that defined her. Now, as I just said to you earlier, I stood on a picket line. My mate Mick, he was a great guy. We just called him Mick the Miner. But before that, he was in the sixth form with me. And I don't think you'll mind telling you, he wasn't the most educated guy. But God, he was an intellectual. Do you know the difference? He could really hold an argument. And he was very camp. Very, very camp. And he used to say, when we were at school, in careers lessons, they'd say, what do you want to be, Gaunty? And I want to be an actor. Idiot. I want to be in the theatre, right? He'd go, I want to be a lumberjack, miss. And there'd be a pause where she decides whether to give him a rollicking or not. And then she'd laugh. That's what he wanted to be, a lumberjack. There wasn't much call for lumberjacks, though, in Coventry in 1978, 79. So he became a miner. He went down the pit, and everyone was really surprised, right? Because although he was quite a specimen, he was a big guy, strong guy, and he had a face like Mick Jagger, right? He did look like Mick Jagger. In fact, Mick Jagger would have liked to look like him, especially after he worked in the pit for a time, because he became really muscular. But he was very camp. And down the, I hope he doesn't mind me telling you this story, down the pit, they called him Lush. And he told, because he was camp, and he told me about the pit, right? And I began to understand just how horrendous it was. He said, don't wear anything down the pit. I'm naked. There's no point in being in clothes. It's too hot. It's too dangerous. And he told me about how they used to go down the pit at Kersley, which is on the basically outskirts of Coventry. And they used to come right into Coventry underneath the Coventry Cathedral. It's miles. And a lot of that, they went on a little single track, little sort of train type thing, but they also walked and crawled. It was a hell of a job, but he got paid really well. So he went down the pit. I went to university, and then we used to see each other intermittently. And then when I finished at university, came back to Coventry, and I set up my theatre company where I had people like Clive Owen in it. We became a movie star. He became a movie star. And a load of other kids who were on the dole, because that's where the difference was. When I went off to university, everybody got a job. When I came back at Christmas, not at Christmas, 3 years later, no one was getting jobs. There just weren't jobs. The Standard Triumph had closed down. Masses was on the verge of closing down. All the big factories went, right? A lot of people blamed Thatcher for that, although the decline was there before. And of course, she did try to stop it, didn't she? The strikes. And then I got a job just before I went. These are the things that make you the political person you are. I got a job at the Standard, pushing Stags, Triumph Stags and Dolomite Sprints. Do you remember them? Great car. Well, they were if they had all the parts. But British industry was so crap at that time. The whole car park was full of cars. And then at the end of the track, they used to have, I think they call it a testing bed. Somebody who's worked in car factories will be able to tell me. And we used to sit on chairs. I worked for a company called Commando Cleaning. I hope they're not in operation anymore. We never did any cleaning. We were meant to do the industrial cleaning during the Coventry fortnight. I think I'd got the sack by then. But anyway, we sat on chairs waiting for cars to come off the line at the very bottom. Because at the very bottom of the line, they get, I think, 2 gallons of petrol put in them. But if they didn't have any relevant parts, so they couldn't start and go into the test bed, our job was, you lot, over here, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, because that's the other thing. It was cash or money. It was cash. I wouldn't do this now, but it was cash in hand. So everyone was called Donald Duck or Rufus or, Robert the Bruce, right? Come and push these cars. So our job was to push out these magnificent cars, if they'd been finished. Triumph Stags. I think it was Stags. It's definitely Dolomite Sprints. And what's it called? A Toledo? I don't know what it's called. Anyway, and push them out into the car park. And these cars were everywhere. I love that part of the job, especially when you got promoted amongst the lads. There was 4 lads, and they said, go on, Gaunty, you can be the steerer. So I ended up steering them. Sometimes you had to push them. What a job. Fantastic. Cash in hand. Lady used to come round with a tea. And in the factory, that was the other great thing about working there. And if anybody from Coventry is watching this, you could get anything you wanted in the factory. I mean, anything. Bits of cars, books that you shouldn't really look at when you're only just 18, if you know what I mean. Drugs, everything. It was like a supermarket of the illicit and criminal. And it had a whole culture of its own. And these lads, 25,000 people, I think it was, worked at the Standard. Later, I had a house at the top of £4 Avenue. Not £4, Kingsland Avenue. And I used to see these lads walking across the common in the morning, going to work like ants, literally like ants, thousands and thousands. And if you come from an industrial town, you've probably got this image as well. Thousands of them going to work. And then they'd come back at 4. And that was the difference in those times. Starmer would not have got away with the stuff he's getting away with now in those days because people congregated. People spoke. We had the working men's clubs attached to the factories. In fact, most of the factories now have gone, in Coventry in particular, like the Standard Triumph that I'm telling you about, is now a retail park. I often wonder where all the money comes from for Sainsbury's, for people to go there. But the clubs are still there. Same with the Jag. The clubs are still there. The factories have gone. But that's where we congregated. That's where working men talked. And that's why the unions were strong. But of course, in a way, and the unions were strong and the management was crap. Let's be absolutely honest about it. Don't blame the decline in the motor industry in the 70s just on the unions. It wasn't. It was bad management and bad unions. So Red Robbo up the road in Longbridge, he'd have them out if somebody put the wrong cheese in the sandwich. And Thatcher was right to clamp down on that and say, let's have a secret vote, a secret ballot. I'm not so sure about the flying pickets, although I like the songs and the rest of it. But that bit she was right about. But it was also terrible, terrible management. And I remember the day that place closed down. I remember the day that closed down. And where did all those people go? And where did all the people go who own the shops and the cafes round about it? How did they earn a living? It's a bit like with COVID now, isn't it? And people working from home. Things have just collapsed in on themselves. Slow collapse. And so has our society. So no wonder we've got kids now saying, no, I wouldn't fight for this country. This country's racist. Because when we had the factories, I'm not glorifying it, by the way. I worked there and I really enjoyed it. But then I really loved going off to university and pretending to be a tree. But the bottom line is they brought people together. It gave us a community, a collective. And so this is where I'm going to come on to the miners, because I don't think anywhere was it stronger than in mining villages like Kersley. They went on strike, right? But that's what it was like. And in those days, if you were a young lad in the factory, you said something out of line, you would get a smack across the chops from one of the older boys. That'd be so stupid, right? And I think that had a way of calming down society. All the ages used to mix. The ages don't mix anymore, do they? I'm considered an old fart, by the Generation Zs. And I think they're all a bunch of numbskulls on their phones with repetitive strain syndrome, or whatever it is. Although I always want them to explain how the latest app works. Are you like that? Bit of a hypocrite? So anyway, so going back to Thatcher, that's one of the things she destroyed. And some of the benefits of that was that the trade unions' ridiculous power was brought into shape. But the miners' strike, so Mick, my mate, Mick the miner, he was on strike for 18 months, I think it was. He got starved back to work, literally starved back. He had to go back. He didn't want to be a scab, but he had to go back. And so did many other men in that village. This was Kersley, right? And in the villages, in the valleys, in Wales and places where it was much more the fundamental job, yeah? In Coventry, it was cars, but they're, with the mine. I can see how it affected communities. And my view on this is this. Scargill is as much to blame, but not more to blame, as much as Maggie Thatcher. He tried earlier, and then Maggie thought, right, I'll be ready for you next time. And they stockpiled the coal, didn't they? And she starved them all back to work. That's what she did. Now, what was wrong with that was that destroyed communities. You go to some of those Welsh and those northern villages, they're like drug dens. It's the same with the fishing industry. If you go right up to the north of Scotland, the moment you take away the main industry, the kids will turn to drugs. It's the same kind of thing. And the tragedy, of course, is there's still loads of coal under our feet. We should be drill, baby, drill, as Donald Trump would say. But we can't, because Ed Miliband, who can't even eat a bacon sandwich, him and Snorbits have decided we've got to go green, even though it's ridiculous, the timescale. This is what annoys me about politics. And so when Thatcher did that with the miners, and it was Scargill as well, because if Scargill had had that second ballot and had got the Democratic right to keep the boys out, he'd have probably won. But he got over voting ambition. In my opinion, I've met him a few times. He just got too big for his boots. And of course, then subsequently, there were all the other stories about him, etc., etc., etc. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. The old Machiavelli line. But I think that with Thatcher as well, because when she fell from grace, it was because she couldn't accept she was yesterday's man. And I call her a man because, let's face it, she has had more books than any other bloke in politics. You can't compare her and her spine to somebody like Starmer or Rishi or Cameron or Theresa May or Liz Truss. She was a real leader, wasn't she? She was a real leader with balls of steel, the Iron Lady. But she made mistakes. And I think the miners' strike, although I'm not totally blaming her, I'm saying that's one of them. Now, the poll tax, somebody earlier, let me just read out some more messages. Can you tell me, John, if llamas pay council tax? I'm asking for a friend. That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know what I'm going to identify as something soon. Well, out of all of them, she had the biggest balls, that's for sure, says Dino on Twitter. Maya says they'll have to reopen the mines to fuel the electric cars. You might be right, Maya. Anybody else want to comment? I'm stopping soon, so get in now if you do. Somebody mentioned earlier about the poll tax. That was her mistake. I think the poll tax was brilliant. I think it was the fairest tax each individual paid, not on the value of the house or how many people are in there. Each individual. I thought it was fine. I don't know why the press engineered the riots, which is what they did. And of course, the most bizarre thing is most of the people who were rioting never paid the effing poll tax. And now, of course, we're beginning to argue about the council tax. What did they say? No taxation, no representation. People are trying to organise, because these council elections aren't going to happen, for people not to pay their council tax. Well, if you don't pay it, they'll have you. I understand the sentiment, and I think it's wrong, although I can't see the point in having an election if that council's not going to be there. I do understand the argument, but you can't help but think this one's come at a good time for Starmer. So that's what I think about Mrs. Thatcher, the achievements. She turned us into a property-owning democracy. Do you not think so? Do you not think she made us a better country, a stronger country? Yes, she, in a way, I don't think she did. I think it was the people who came after her were more into the greed and the loads of money kind of attitude and don't care about anyone else. I think Thatcher genuinely wanted people to be successful. And if you were successful, she wanted you to leave the ladder down and pull other people up, which is what buying the council flats and houses was about, wasn't it? Whereas I think the Tories who came after that, Leon Britton and monsters, horrible people like that. And she had people like that in her own government. Sir Keith Joseph used to make my skin crawl. I think some of those people, they just wanted to make it and then they would boot you down the ladder. I'm not sure Thatcher was that. I think she was this genuine working class girl who hit it lucky, got herself to Oxford, got herself a fantastic job, became an MP, became the leader of the country. Thatcher was a female Churchill. Johnson tried to model himself on them, but he failed. But he would fail because that comes down to the fact that Johnson's not the genuine article. This is the Donald Trump theory that I keep putting forward. The reason why Donald Trump is a success and will be a success is because he speaks the language of the people. The same with Nigel Farage. It's different. They've got it. You can't learn that. You've either got the X factor, the charisma, or you haven't. It's true. It's like baking a cake. If I baked a cake, it'd definitely have a soggy bottom and not rise. Talking about one of the other problems now. But if Prue Leith did it, hers would rise every time. Or Graham Kerr, remember her? Him? The Galloping Gourmet. I used to love his shows. But do you understand what I'm saying? They've got the X factor. They can do it. And some people can and some people can't. That's the way it is. And see, that's the other thing with Thatcher. Some people are winners, some people are losers. Some people are great at sports day. They win the hurdling, they win the 1,500 meters, and they can do shot put as well. Others like me can't, but I'm okay at rugby. And you've got to fail to know what success is. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's part of my fundamental philosophy. And I think Thatcher was kind of the personification of that. So 50 years on from the day she became the leader of the Tory party, I think she did a good job on the whole, on the balance. I'm willing to be told off and told I'm wrong. That's all okay. But I think on the whole, she did a good job. She was certainly the best Prime Minister since Churchill. She certainly was an amazing achievement as a woman. And there's Labour with all their wokeness and I want to be a llama. I tell you what, love, be a woman first and try and be the leader of the Labour Party. You're so egalitarian in the Labour Party, you've never had a woman in the top job. By my reckoning, the Tories have had 2 now, haven't they? No, 3. Theresa May. Theresa May, there's been 3 of them. Just my views. Right, I'm stopping now. So unless you want to get in with a quick comment, I'm going to leave it there. But my overall thing then, Maggie Thatcher was a force for good. If you like what I've been talking about today, please feel free to share this video or this podcast when you see it come up on social media. Tell other people you're listening to John Gaunt. Yeah, oh yeah, he's not dead. He's back. John Gaunt's back. And he's got his own little TV channel on YouTube and he's got his podcasts, etc., etc. And if you can help me, I don't know why I keep saying this because no one's been helping this week, but if you can, donate a $5 upwards onto this thing called buymeacoffee.com. Look, here we are. There's the thing. www.buymeacoffee.com/John Gaunt. It all helps to keep me going, to keep these podcasts going and these videos. And you know what I want to do? I want to develop it. And I think they're great. I mean, yesterday's, I listened back to, I think they're great, arrogant twat. But I listened back to yesterday's, and the first 10 minutes of yesterday's was outstanding. It was some of the best audio I've ever produced. I just did this flight of fancy, rant, whatever you want to call it, stream of consciousness about Starmer and what I think of him. And it's brilliant. The rest of it's crap. But if you listen to the first 10 minutes of yesterday's, I think you might see what I mean. Great show. I'm so happy you're back. Thank you. What does Rob Wright say? Let me put his up on the screen. Although I'm a socialist, John, as I've got older, I do realise that she was a great leader. Can you imagine how she'd have dealt with the pandemic? Yeah. There wouldn't have been Partygate. I think that's very true. In fact, before I go, I did find a really interesting thing on Wikipedia about Maggie, a quote of hers. And it's quite a long one, but let me just see if I can find it, because here it is. Because I think this is as apt today as it was when she said it. Have a listen. I think this is Maggie Thatcher's own words, and it's the one that she's been misquoted on the most. I think we've gone through a period when too many children and people have been given to understand, I have a problem. It is the government's job to cope with it. Or, I have a problem. I would go and get a grant to cope with it. I am homeless. The government must house me. And so they are casting their problems on society. And who is society? Maggie Thatcher's words. Here it is. There is no such thing. That's the quote that became, there is no such thing as society. I'm just putting it to you now, what she actually said. There is no such thing. There are individual men and women, and there are families, and no government can do anything except through people. And people look to themselves first. It's our duty to look after ourselves, and then also to help look after our neighbor. And life is a reciprocal business. And people have got the entitlements too much in mind without the obligations. I found that today. I'd never seen it. I've done the line about no such thing as society, and I think I've misquoted it. I think she's bang on the money. I used to always talk about rights and responsibilities. Excuse me. Too many people know their rights, but not their responsibilities. We've got a situation where there's that guy, I think he was from Albania. He said he can't go back to live in Albania or Afghanistan because his kids don't like foreign chicken nuggets. And he's won. He's not having to go back, although I see Starmer's getting involved. And did you see the deportation? I've just got to stress this again. Don't be conned. Those deportations, that's what I talked about in this 10-minute rant at the beginning. They were people who volunteered to go back. They're overstayers. Hardly any of them, were people who've come off the boat or have caused a ruction to go. These people who have basically said, okay, I'll go back. And did you know what? Most of them are getting paid to go back to their country. It's good we're getting rid of them. Oh, that's fine. But they're basically overstayers. And there was a big fuss made in the papers this morning. 19,000 in the first 7 months. It's not even that. It's in the ocean, isn't it? So don't get conned. Don't get conned by any politician of any party. And I guess that's why, again, just to finish on Thatcher, at least you knew where she stood, didn't you? And don't we need leadership like that now? So going back to Trump, that's why Trump will do it. Like Trump overnight when he said to Hamas, you let go of all those hostages by 12 noon on Saturday, or it'll be hell and damnation. And he ain't joking. Although they've now come back and said, he can't threaten us. Who does he think he's... Hang on. You're the terrorist scum who went into that kibbutz, raped, disfigured, chopped up, ripped babies out of wombs, and you're now telling us that the leader of the free world can't say, give us back the hostages, or we're going to sort you out. I mean, he can't bomb you back into the Stone Age. He's already done that. But that's what I can't stand. And people are treating Hamas now as if they're a legitimate government. And they're not. They are terrorists. And Trump is right to stand up to them. absolutely right. Again, I don't think he's right about everything, but that's leadership. That's what we need in this country. If you've got kids, give them a kiss, give them a hug. Hey, hey, hey. Don't forget to tell them you love them. And I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks a lot. Bye.